Grade 8 Biology. It's all about ecology, really. Our first topic is photosynthesis. This is a process that plants use to produce glucose from sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. It needs a substance called chlorophyll, that's that green pigment that we have in the leaves and some stems that captures the energy. It occurs in little organelles inside the cells of the leaves called chloroplasts. If I had to write a word equation, it would be carbon dioxide plus water plus radiant energy and chlorophyll react to form glucose and oxygen. I can write it as an abbreviated chemical equation using symbols. CO2, gas, carbon dioxide plus water liquid reacts to form glucose and oxygen. Whilst the sunlight and chlorophyll are necessary, they're not one of the reagents. The gases, the carbon dioxide and the oxygen, exchange through holes in the leaves. We call these small holes stomata. Carbon dioxide and water are the reagents or reactants. The arrow stands for reacts to form, and the glucose and the oxygen are the products of photosynthesis. It's biologically important because it converts radiant energy into chemical potential energy. That's the glucose. It's the start of the food chain. It recycles carbon dioxide and turns it into oxygen, and this is necessary for cellular respiration. Glucose is then later converted and stored as starch, chemical potential energy, or cellulose, which is wood. That's for the cell walls that gives structure and support, eventually allowing trees to grow big and strong. The second topic is cellular respiration, and it's how living organisms, all plants and animals, get energy from their food. The process involves glucose breaking down in the presence of oxygen to release energy. It occurs in a little organelle in all animal and plant cells called a mitochondrion. It's the reverse process of photosynthesis. So if carbon dioxide and water plus the sun's energy and chlorophyll via a process of photosynthesis create glucose and oxygen, then the reverse process in the mitochondria called respiration releases energy. We can prove that a human is respiring, doing respiration, by testing for the carbon dioxide that they breathe out. If you blow bubbles into clear lime water, then it turns a milky white color, as seen in the second beaker. Now about ecosystems. It's when plants and animals interact with one another and the non-living aspects of the environment. Ecology is the study of these interactions, the study of ecosystems. An ecosystem could be very large, like Addo Elephant Park, or small, like a pond. In fact, the Earth, which is a giant sphere, could be considered an ecosystem. The biosphere refers to the parts on Earth where life exists. That's on the land, a little bit underneath the land, in the atmosphere, and in the hydrosphere. And the land is called the lithosphere. And the three together make the biosphere. Some more terms we need to know. A population refers to the number of a single species. For example, the number of elephants in Addo. Community, on the other hand, is the different populations that interact with each other in the same ecosystem. And the habitat is a place where these organisms live. Biotic and abiotic factors. These are the living ones, and the abiotic, the non-living. Apart from plants and animals, we must also consider bacteria and fungi, like mushrooms and mold, and the unicellular microscopic organisms called protists. The abiotic factors involve the non-living things: soil, light, water, air, humidity, temperature. Also the slope of the land. Is it steep or is it not? If it's on a slope, does it face, which direction does it face? Does it face north, which would be the sunny slope in the southern hemisphere, or south, which would be a lot shadier? Feeding relationships. The producers are the plants, and they make the food by photosynthesis, and the animals are the consumers. Now, you know, since junior school, these terms: herbivores, carnivores, omnivores. The herbivores eat the plants, the carnivores eat them. We can talk about predators like a lion, scavengers like a hyena or a vulture. Insectivores, as you can guess, they eat insects. Omnivores, like many humans, eat both plant and animal matter, and then the decomposers. Some examples of insectivores: the aardwolf eats termites. The bat-eared fox eats all sorts of insects. And birds, like the hoopoe, our national bird, the blue crane, the fly-eat catcher, the rooikop houtkapper, and the paradise flycatcher. Decomposers, they are really worth a little more discussion. The macroorganisms are the ones you can see, like earthworms, beetles. Here's a dung beetle. Other decomposers at work: mushrooms, which are a type of fungi. Here they're growing on a tree. Mold. And then the microorganisms, the ones you can't see, like the house dust mites. They'd eat up all the dead skin that you're discarding in the home. Other bacteria, and here are some filaments of the hyphae of mold and other bacteria. They play such an important role in breaking things down and returning the nutrients to the soil. And this brings us to our own food garden project. The method that we are following regenerates dead sand into healthy soil. How does it do this? Well, first of all, we add some manure at a depth about 10 centimeters, and this promotes the decomposition because manure is full of good bacteria. We don't do plowing. Plowing just turns the soil, and the bacteria that live below the soil are then exposed to the sun and get killed. And then we add the grass blanket, and this protects the soil from drying out, keeps the moisture in the soil. There's almost no evaporation. It saves on water. It's insulating, so it prevents the soil from getting too hot or cold in a cold climate. Provides mulch for the decomposition, keeping the soil alive. It prevents soil erosion, so when the heavy rains come, it actually softens the effect, and it minimizes the amount of weeds that grow. So back to the feeding relationships. We can show a food chain. It always starts with the producers, in this case grass, and then we get the consumers. And the arrows, notice the direction, always go in the direction of the movement of the energy. Food is chemical potential energy, and it is consumed, so the energy goes from the grass to the grasshopper, and then the mouse, the snake, and the secretary bird. Notice at each stage decomposition can occur. Dead leaves and grass lie on the ground. Dead animals, their waste products, their feces and their urine, all gets decomposed and added to the soil. And that's what should be happening in healthy soil. A single food chain. Here we have a food web. It's not a single food chain, but a variety of food chains and interactions that overlap with one another in an ecosystem. We can also represent it as a food pyramid. The producer is always at the bottom, and so we go up the primary consumers, which are herbivores, the secondary consumers, which eat them, and finally the tertiary consumers, or the apex consumer. So these are herbivores, carnivores, and these little arrows are talking about energy that's lost. So the base of the pyramid is bigger than the subsequent levels. Why? Well, not all the energy that's in the first layer is available as food for the second layer. So this is sometimes referred to as the energy pyramid. Notice the decomposers are doing their work at every level and returning the nutrients to the soil. But energy is lost, and what's it lost to? Well, the energy of the things we do in our lives, living activities involving our movement, breathing, heartbeat, keeping our body temperature warm, reproductive, and even thinking uses energy. Roughly 10% of the energy available as food for the next level. Balance in nature. Species compete with each other for resources. They all need food, shelter, and water, etc. When there's abundant amount of resources, it can support large populations. But when it's scarce, well, then there's fierce competition, and only the fittest survive. Let's think of the woodland mice, the mice in the forest. Well, if there are more mice, then there's more food available for the owls that hunt them. So the owl population will increase. But the more the owls are, the more they eat the mice, so then the mice population decreases, which means there's now a reduced amount of food for the owls, and so the number of the owls will decrease. And that is how balance is maintained naturally through these feeding relationships. Disruptions to an ecosystem. These can be natural, like floods, too much water, drought, too little, big storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, fire, extreme temperatures. And if the disruption is for a short period, it's likely to recover, but if it's prolonged or extreme, it may not. But what's more concerning is the problems humans create. Pollution and poaching. Litter. Litter can lie inert in dumps. That's not too much of a problem, but it's worst when it gets into the ocean. And there's even evidence now of microplastics in the food chain. Burning fossil fuels. Eskom burns coal for electricity, and cars burn diesel and petrol and put millions of tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Not only that, sulfur impurities in the coal put sulfur dioxide, and car fumes nitrogen dioxide into the air, and these dissolve in the rain and causes acid rain, which then damages plants, crops, the soil, and even the groundwater. Carbon dioxide is one of the greenhouse gases, and it causes global warming. You might have heard of the term, you must lower your carbon footprint. Well, that refers to lowering carbon dioxide emissions. Further problems. Chemicals, both household and factories, that go into the air and the water. On a landfill site, the rain leaches chemicals into the groundwater, and that's impossible to clean up. Farmers use fertilizers. Excess nutrients get washed into the river and upsets the balance of nature for the aquatic organisms. Factories and a power station like Coburg releases hot water into the rivers, Coburg in the sea. We call this thermal pollution. It decreases the oxygen in the water, animals die, bacteria starts decomposing the dead animals, that uses up even more oxygen, and the water eventually becomes toxic. Poaching, which is the illegal removal of a species. In Port Elizabeth, the big problem are the perlemon. Here is the shell of one that's legal size to take out of the water. You can see it's about the size of a person's hands, but these ones are too small, and once it's out of the shell, it looks like that. The English call it abalone, and it's considered an aphrodisiac and exported to Asia. But the poachers die for it using scuba gear, which is illegal. It's not fair, and they go under for a long period of time and just strip the rocks of all of them, irrespective of the size, even the little ones. Sport divers, on the other hand, if they pay for a license, they have to use a snorkel. That means taking a breath, going down, and you can only be down for a few seconds, and you're limited to only taking 5 of the big ones. The big ones about the size of your hand are not allowed to fit through the measuring ring like that. Here's a police bus. Look at all those perlemon. Wow. On the other hand, farming perlemon is good business. Well, what can you say to that? Isn't that disgusting? Because of a mistaken belief that eating the horn will make you more sexually potent or something. If we look at this alarming graph, we can see that only 10 years ago, more than 1,200 rhino were killed in Africa, most of them in South Africa. It's dropped a little, but 2020, the last lot of figures shown, there were 500 rhinos murdered. Adaptations. Well, plants can reproduce vegetatively, like this strawberry sending out little runners, making new daughter plants. And once they're established, the runner breaks and they are now separate. Well, the thing is, their offspring have identical genes. But if there's a change in the environment that they are not suited to, then they all die. Sexual reproduction, which is how animals reproduce, ensures variety within a species. Just think of the humans, those in the class around you, how different we are. Well, half your genes come from your dad and half from your mum, and that ensures variety, and we're all unique. When conditions change in the environment, at least some are more likely to survive. The fittest survive. We call this natural selection. The best genes, the genes that are best adapted to the new conditions, will survive. Over generations, a species can even change its characteristics. For example, short-necked giraffes have since become extinct. There's a fossil park near Saldanha Bay on the west coast where there's almost like a graveyard of all these short-necked giraffe. This is a depiction of what it would have looked like from the collection of fossilized bones. And here's an artist's impression of what it was like. So something changed in the environment, and the short-necked ones did not survive. And the longer-necked ones did, and that's the genes that continued up until present. Looking at how plants are adapted. Two main varieties in extreme conditions, those adapted to dry conditions like the gazania shown here. They have hairy leaves that reflect the sun and also trap moisture, and bright flowers to attract pollinators. The prickly pear can also live in very dry conditions. It has very succulent stems which have taken over the role of photosynthesis, and the leaves have been reduced to mere thorns. The other extreme are hydrophytes, which are adapted to living in the water, like the water lilies. Now, we mentioned earlier that the exchange of gases during photosynthesis occurs through the leaves. Well, they have stomata, these small holes on the top side of the leaf. Mangrove trees, like we see at St. Lucia in KwaZulu-Natal, are adapted to living in the water. In your textbook on page 42, we have this picture, which talks about the different structures and adaptations that a camel has to living in a desert. Similarly, in the Arctic, where polar bears live. I'm not going to go through these. This is something you have done in class already. Cheetahs, well, they have very good eyesight. They can run very fast. They're well camouflaged, so they can stalk close to the prey, and they're very sharp claws and teeth. Sharks have a good sense of smell. Visibility isn't always good in the water. They're very streamlined with big muscular tail, and they can swim very fast and very sharp teeth. Camouflage, well, can you see the little gecko on the tree? The snow fox, the cheetah. Can you see the owl perched in the tree? And there's a giraffe standing very still and thinks it's not even noticed. Mimicry, something else you must understand. Here are two varieties or two different species of butterfly. The monarch is the one that doesn't taste well. We say it's unpalatable, whereas the viceroy butterfly is palatable. But these guys survive and benefit because the predators don't eat them because they think they taste bad. That looks like this. Now, it would have taken generations of different viceroy butterflies to have been eaten, but the ones that resembled the monarch were not eaten, and so their genes survived, and gradually over many generations, the viceroy started looking more and more like the monarch. This we refer to as mimicry, when one species eventually starts looking like another one because it stands to benefit. Conservation. South Africa has a very proud tradition with some of the best nature reserves in the world, and this map shows some of the wilderness areas, the light green and the darker green, like the Kruger National Park, which is world famous and a source of great tourism for people coming to look at game. It's bigger than the size of some countries in Europe. Alien vegetation. These are plants that are not indigenous, and the ones I'm going to show you are either from South America or Australasia, Australia and New Zealand. And the problem with them is they invade. We call them invaders, and they do this because they have no natural enemies. The ones you're going to see are the Rooikrans, Port Jackson, black wattle. These are all types of acacias. The blue gums, a type of eucalyptus, sesbania, and prickly pears. So how do we get rid of these? Well, mechanically you can uproot them, cut them down, burn them with a fire, or chemically you can poison them. Often they put a blue dye in it so they can see which trees they have poisoned, and sometimes they cut them first and then poison the stumps. And then there's biological control, introducing a natural enemy. So let's look at some of these now. Here is a Gr8 and a big one. One of the biological control methods for Gr8 and Port Jackson trees is the gall wasp. This little wasp lays its eggs in the stem, and this gall starts to develop. And you can see inside here it's been cut in half. There's a larva that is growing and will eventually emerge as a new wasp. And the adult can continue to lay more eggs, and so these wart-like structures grow and grow. They don't kill the plant, but they will inhibit it from producing seeds. Remember, one plant can produce millions of seeds in a lifetime, each one of which producing a new plant. Where the name Gr8 comes from, a krans in Afrikaans is a wreath, and it looks like a little red wreath around the black seed. The English call it Acacia cyclops, the cyclops being that mythical creature that has a single eye in the middle of its forehead. Black wattle. These have characteristic variegated feather-like leaves. They have nice straight stems, and as you can see down here, they completely invade, take over, and nothing else is growing. So the original habitat has completely been destroyed. Because of those straight stems, they sometimes are used usefully in making screens and walls in a garden, and a traditional form of building homes. They make what they call wattle and daub. The wattle is woven basket-like into the structure, and then a mixture of mud, clay, and cow dung is plastered on either side of the wattle sticks, and that's how a traditional mud hut is made. Port Jackson, well, characteristically these long, skinny, waxy leaves, and when in bloom, very yellow, millions of pom-pom-like little flowers. Blue gums. They're part of the eucalyptus family, and you can see them here, very characteristic tree trunks. The problem is they can suck up, if they're big, up to 1,000 liters of water per day that they then lose through their leaves by transpiration. That's the process where water is transported from the ground through the roots, the stems, and out through the leaves. They also release chemicals into the soil that kill other plants, and you can see at the base here absolutely nothing else is growing. Sesbania. Its natural enemy, biological control, is a weevil. It lays its eggs in the stem, and here you can see the larva has been eating it. The stem is now dead, and it's turning into the adult weevil. Finally, the prickly pear. This white fungus-like stuff on is actually an insect. It's called the cochineal insect, and it's used as biological control on the prickly pear. If you squash it, it actually looks this reddish color and has been used as food colorant in the past, and commonly called cochineal. Wetlands are very sensitive areas, potentially very beautiful, full of wildlife, a lot of diversity, and they are incredibly important. They're often bordering on a river, where the water flows from the catchment area finally into the river. They filter and clean the water, they store it, they prevent flooding because they can store so much water. They're breeding grounds for many animals, small fish and birds, and the perfect recreational spot for bird watching, canoeing, fishing. But unfortunately, our wetlands are threatened. And here we have one right now, right here in our town, the Swartkorps estuary, but all this wetland is severely compromised. Number one, by the sewage work which is over there, and sometimes things happen and leaks occur, and we're getting untreated sewage leaking into the estuary. And on the other side, if you go across the Swartkorps Bridge and up the hill, if you're going to Motherwell, on the left-hand side is EnviroServe's toxic waste dam. And they put all this toxic waste into a big dam that's rubberized at the bottom, but holes have developed, and it's seeping through there and down the hill and finally making its way towards the estuary. These are real town planning mistakes, and they should never have been allowed to happen in the first place. What a pity. Situation just around the corner over here, out of shot, where during December they had to close the Brighton beach because of dangerously high levels of E. coli, which is the bacteria you find in sewage. And if you have an epidemic of that illness, it's called cholera, and it's serious. So they actually closed the beach because of raw sewage seeping into the sea from this sewage works. And that's it so far.